Hi everyone, so we're going to finish off this track now, finish the mix and then master it. So there's a couple of things I've been doing to it, just because they take a bit of time, but I'll explain what they are. You don't have to watch me do it. So I've put level meters on all of the tracks. Now this is really important. There's something called gain staging, which is basically just making sure that all of your tracks aren't overly loud. Remember, you're making the track louder in the mastering stage, so with your mixing stage you want to control all of your tracks so they're behaving themselves and they're not overly loud. This can also be affected by plugins you put on them as well, so once you've when you're usually doing stuff with plugins, you should be shaping the sound, not making it louder. So when I've added EQ, compression, etc., I always turn the plugins off to make sure the sound's still the same volume as it was before. I've just shaped it, so always bypass your plugins and check. So with these level meters, they'll just show you what level you're running at. So for example, if I just play the drums here, I've got a level meter on here. Now I've got it set, so I don't want that track going above minus 12 dB, which is similar to what 0 dB would be on an analog system. They usually recommend you gain stage your tracks between minus 18 to minus 12 or minus 16 to minus 12. I'm doing it minus 12. It just means that all of my tracks are behaving themselves and they're not going louder than that. And then I can adjust the overall volume on the faders for the mix, but I just know that none of my tracks are too loud. Common mistake I see with people when they're starting out is a lot of their channels are overloading, they're in the red, all the levels all over the place, and that's either because they don't know about gain staging or they're just not doing it. And it just makes it harder. It's not very efficient for when you want to master, and it's just the way you should do it. So gain staging is important. If you're not doing that and you're having problems getting nice sounding mixes, that might be one reason why. It goes along with panning, EQ, everything. All of these things come together. So I've on that drum track, it's not going past minus 12, so I'm happy. And I've done this with everything. So this one on the guitar bus. So that's fine, that's nowhere near peaking. Yeah, so I've just done this for every track, or if some tracks are being fed to a bus, like the guitars for example, I've put the level meter on the guitar bus. I did put it on these two, but this is the one I'm concerned with because that's where they're going. I've played around with a few things, moving things around in the panning area just to give stuff space. So I've done some automated pans at various sections, just to move things around. So I did that with the guitars here. So this guitar bus has an automated pan because it's in this middle section. There's no second guitar, so I made the first guitar go in the middle so it fills out the stereo field, and then it goes back left after the second guitar comes in, which is panned right. So I've done a few things like that. I think it's sounding pretty nice now. Everything's sitting quite nicely. Even though we compressed the vocal originally in Studio One, I've put an extra compressor on there, just because on some notes it was getting a bit harsh, a bit too gainy. So I just put an Opto valve style compressor on there to just control it a little bit in some of the loud notes. Yeah, so everything's sounding quite nice. I think I'll just check levels and then we'll go on to mastering it really. Let's just have a listen here. The violin's still a little loud, I think. I'm gonna pull that down a bit more. Enjoy the ride. Now the battle's won. Time to step into the light. Tell me why it's not over. Tell me why there'll be next time. Tell me it's not right, 'cause now I've seen the light. I don't Okay, yeah, that's something quite nice. Some things are gonna come out a little bit. Usually, when you master, the limiter will bring the vocal out a bit, so I know that's gonna be a bit louder when I master it. Loads of headroom on my output here. So you usually want to aim between -5 and -3 dB. I think I've got more than that. It's just the way it's ended up, which is fine. Doesn't matter. I can just turn it up in the with the limiter.
My old friend, sit behind my eyes and tell me where I'm going wrong. Speak loud and whisper hard. Shine the light so I'm.
Maybe push the bass up a touch.
Tell me why I don't deserve it. Tell me.
Now, as we're only doing one track, I'm just going to master it in this Logic session. If you have multiple tracks, you probably want to bounce them out without anything on your output fader, and then place them all together to master so that you can fade them between each other and get all the levels correct. You obviously want to make sure every track's the same volume, but we're only mastering one, so I'm just going to do it in here. We've got our levels pretty much set here, so when you're pretty much happy with your mix, you can start thinking about doing the mastering processing. So you notice I've got some stuff already set up here, but at the moment it's turned off. One plugin that's really important here is the multimeter. You'll find this in metering, multimeter. This has two modes. There's the genometer and the analyzer. It just tells you what's going on the track, and this is quite important. So if we click here somewhere.
And whisper hard, shine the light so I'm.
Basically, it's telling you where the main frequency content is in the mix. It's also got this correlation meter here, which tells you whether your mix is mono-compatible. So if someone was listening to this on a little Bluetooth speaker where it's only mono, if it's not mono-compatible, i.e. it's to the left of this mid-bar, you're going to lose stuff that only works in stereo. When it's summed down to mono, it's going to get cancelled. So you want to make sure your mix is in the green and mostly staying there.
Must find the will to carry on.
That's all looking good. It's right over here in the green section, so I'm not worried about having any issues if someone were to listen in a small speaker with it. It also tells you your output levels as well. So you've got your peak and RMS levels, which the peak levels are what we usually work to when recording, but it's also got something here called LUFS, loudness units full scale. This is kind of the new standard for monitoring loudness, so there are different levels depending on what you're trying to do with it. So if you were doing a mix for Spotify, the Spotify audio level is -14 LUFS. So you can just master it to that level and it will play fine in Spotify. If you make it louder than that, Spotify will just turn it down. So if you've pushed a master to try and make it sound really loud and it's for Spotify, you might as well just master it to -14 and have a more dynamic mix. You can have a louder mix for a CD release, or like, you know, a release that's not on a streaming site. So I usually aim for around -9, -8, -9 LUFS for something that isn't mastered for streaming, so it can be a bit louder for, I don't know, radio play or just generally on CD or something. So that's important to keep in mind. Obviously at the moment we haven't added any limiting, so our levels aren't going to be up that high.
Tell me why I don't deserve it. Tell me why it's all my fault.
So we got about 6.2 dB, give or take. Might go a bit louder to 5 at some points, which is fine. So I've got headroom left to master it. If it was peaking already and you try to make it louder and mastering, it's just going to distort and sound really bad. So you want to always leave space. So what I've done for my mastering chain here is I've got console EQ, which is the emulation of that nice Neve. Down at EQ, a vintage EQ, and that's the console EQ. Mainly, I just want that nice high-end boost, and I've not done much. So at the mastering stage, if your mix is sounding pretty much how you want it, the mastering doesn't have to be that crazy. I'm just adding some sweetening EQ to the whole mix, a little bit of compression just to put it all together. and hold it so it doesn't have any spikes of transients or volume that come through, and adding a limiter. Now there are other things you can do as well. You can add things like tape saturation and various other modeling plugins that emulate old desks and stuff, but these 3 plugins are fine to do with the standard mix, standard master, EQ, comp, and a limiter. So you could do a good limit with this. That's all you need, really. Some people add stereo widening and stuff. I don't like doing that on the master fader. It does weird stuff with phase. But you can make your individual buses louder. So if I'm doing a heavy rock mix, I'll have all my electric guitars go on a bus, and then I'll put a stereo widener on them to make them a bit louder. Sorry, a bit wider. And sometimes on overhead, stuff like that. But I'm not doing that right now. Logic does have a stereo widener. I tend to use one by a company called Waves, or one called Isotope, which is free actually. If you want a widener, there's one by, there we go, Isotope, sorry. Ozone 2 Imager. This is free. And you can make your stereo, make your mix wider in terms of the stereo width, which is pretty fun. Works well on things like guitars, vocal harmonies, things like that. Have a go with it, it's free. But I'm not going to use that right now. I don't really want to on this mix. Okay, so let's just see what it does.
Speak loud.
So you can hear that. It's just made everything just a little brighter, but not too much. I've only pushed up a touch.
And whisper hard, shine the light, so I must find the will to carry on.
Next, compression. So with this, you've got your different compressor models. I'm using the vintage VCA, which is based on the old G-Bus compressor that used to be built into SSL recording desks. You run the whole mix through it, and it just controls the dynamic range a bit, so you're not compressing much here. So because it's a whole mix, you want a slow attack and a fast-ish release. 4:1, I'll usually go for on the ratio, and you only want to be compressing 2 to 3 decibels, not too much.
Tell me why
As soon as I turn it on, you get a bit more punch in the drums, just a bit more dynamic.
I don't deserve it. Tell me why it's all my fault.
Right, notice it's not making it any louder, it's just shaping the sound because I gain staged it, so I made sure it wouldn't. That's important.
Tell me all my crimes. Show me all my lies. I don't need you anymore. The time has come.
So I'm happy with that. So now we're going to add the
To
limiter.
recognize
So this, I'm going to bring this
battles
up
we
gradually.
fought and won.
The limiter allows us to make our track louder, so to a professional level. So with the multimeter open as well, you'll notice the levels will go up when I raise it. I had it to about 7 dB again. So let's see what happens.
With the fire in our eyes, we walked along, we shared the ride, went toe to toe with fear.
So now we're getting around -14, -13, so it's already at Spotify level. You could push it a bit further if you wanted to for a different release. That's up to you. I usually use a different limiter to this, but I'm showing you with the Logic stock plugins, but you could push a bit louder if you want to.
And we swam against the tide. Tell me why it wasn't worth it. Tell me why I was better off. Tell me it's alright. I don't believe your lies. I don't need you.
That's it, really. Yeah, mastering shouldn't be crazy. Now, if you were given a track from someone else that mixed and you hadn't mixed it, mastering might be harder because there might be problems in the mix that you can't go back to it and fix it. So you have to do quite precise EQ and stuff like that. So if you ever have to do that, you might find this EQ very useful. The linear phase EQ, which is designed for mastering, being used on stereo sources. And then, of course, you can analyze
Anymore.
the whole mix.
Anymore.
And if you have had problem frequencies, you could get rid of them. I mean, sometimes you get some build up in those low mids that you want to get rid of. I think this one's fine, again, because I've done stuff in the mix. I've EQ'd the tracks individually, all that stuff. But linear phase is a good one to use if you need to fix problems. And I've made it a bit brighter with an EQ, but not too much. It's very easy to add too much when you master, especially things like high end. So yeah, I'm doing this in headphones at the moment. I don't have my monitors on. If I were doing this one properly, I would check it in all my different speakers and things like that. And I actually have hardware processors, compressors and stuff that I run it through. But for this purpose, we'll just do it all in the box. Yeah, so I think that sounds pretty nice. I do those three. EQ, compression, and limiting. And then I'd bounce the mix and test it in some systems. But yeah, it sounded good.
Now walk along, enjoy the ride. Now the battle's won, time to step in.
So I think it's peaking around -12 LUFS, which is okay for this style of music. That's probably fine. That would depend on the person you were mixing it for, what their preference would be, client preference. So I just go through this, check it a few more times, make sure there's no mistakes in it, in terms of what I've done with panning and things like that, which I made a mistake there. Happens. It's just double checking your work. And then I'd bounce it out as a 24-bit 44.1 WAV, and then it's ready. Just quickly, it's worth mentioning, because you've done the mix and you've done the mastering yourself, when you bounce that out, you've got to make sure you do it correctly. So you can do Command B or go down to Bounce, Project or Section. Now, the first thing, as you know, would just be to select all your regions, Command U. That's going to sit just fine. Just make sure everything fades out nicely. So that's this track here. So let's just make sure.
Hello, I don't need
you. Great. So that's all good. So let's bounce this. Now, we want to bounce this as PCM. In this case, it was recorded in 24-bit, so we're going to keep it that way. 24-bit, 44.1 WAV, AIF, whichever. AIF is the Apple format of a lossless file, so not compressed, and WAV is the PC format, so AIF's fine. This is really important. Make sure normalize is off. Normalize, when you've quickly done a recording, raises the volume of a track, but obviously you've done that manually with your processing, so turn normalize off. If it normalizes, it will just ruin everything you've done, so that's really important. I mean, mine's always off because I never use it, so it remembers. We must make sure that's done. And then you just press OK, give it a name, and you're done.